Welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, brought to you by NDIS Property Australia. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Hi everybody, my name is Minh and I'm from NDIS Property Australia, and you're listening to the SDA Housing Podcast. The show explains, highlights, guides and brings awareness about all things SDA in this ever-changing NDIS world. Today we have a repeat guest speaker, Mr. Kevin Chen from Paramount Disability Homes. Kevin, welcome.
Thank you, Minh. Thanks for having me again.
Right.
How are you?
Today I'm doing you a favor. You wanted to be more efficient with your time and have a podcast with all the questions that people normally ask you, so that whenever someone does ring you, you can say, listen to the podcast. All my answers on there, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's been a couple of great podcasts that I've forwarded on to some of the, investors that work with us, because, things like one of them was the Ballarat, Data Unlocked series. That was great for our investors to have a listen to the demand. You guys specialize in that. So I thought, why not jump on, answer some of the most commonly asked questions that we receive from investors and just answer them in one podcast, and I can share this to any future investors that we have.
Exactly. Well, I've received your 5 common questions and they're great. However, I'll also add another few mine at the end of this. So let's jump right into it, Kevin. Does the landlord cover the damages in an SDA home?
Yeah, great question. So again, with repairs, we typically, this is how we do it in Victoria. Typically, 4 types of different repairs or damages. So the first 2 are related to participants. Number 1 being the participant intentionally damages the property. So if the participant intentionally damages the property, they are responsible for the damages, to pay the damages. The second one is the participant unintentionally damages the property, or it is related to their disability. And in this case, the actual SDA provider, or I should say the investor, landlord, has to cover the damages. This is quite common. And about 95% of damages that we see are always the second case. So because we can always relate it back to the disability. So if they're robust category, if they accidentally cause some sort of damage, it's always the landlord's responsibility to cover. The third type of damage is the SDA provider damages the property. So if the care provider does something, it is their responsibility. And finally, it is any sort of, structural wear or tear or general wear or tear. So if it's general wear or tear, still landlord. Structural as well, typically landlord. But for general wear and tear, you've got typically your landlord NDIS policy. If it exceeds a certain amount, you probably exercise that policy. And then with sort of any structural wear and tear or structural issues, most investors are covered by building warranty, which is around 10 years. But obviously that differs with every builder. So those are the 4 types of repairs that we see. Very rarely do we see participants pay for their damage, because it can always be related back to their disability or in some shape or form, accidental damage.
Oh, that's awesome. That's good to hear. Now, the second question here is, can different category participants live in any SDA? But common sense prevails if...
Yeah, so this is a really commonly asked question, because we have, for example, high physical support properties that have sat vacant in some areas, I should say. And there's been, for example, robust participants that can't find housing in that area that want to live in the high physical support properties. Now, obviously, the first point is, the participants have to, be okay with living in a high physical support property. There is no restriction in the NDIA to say that, a robust participant can't live in a high physical support property, or a high physical support participant can't live in a robust category, or a high physical support participant can't live in an improved livability house. there are no restrictions. The choice and control remains on the participant, given that it fits their needs and they want to move in. You know,
If the provider can show there are no behaviours of concern of a robust participant, then in theory they shouldn't be making any damages in a HPS house. Is that correct?
that's correct, yes. But even if they are to damage the property, some high physical support properties are fixed, are built to a way that, it's cross category. So they've got certain robust fixtures. And as long as landlords are happy to pay for the damages, they understand the extent, then there's nothing restricting a robust participant to live in high physical support. The only restriction is a robust participant cannot live in an apartment. That is one of the only rules in SDA where you can't have a participant living in a design category not approved for it.
Oh, well, that's pretty cool. What do supervisors look for in SDA homes? Be it a robust home or an HPS home. Can you give us some guidance here?
Yeah, so the supervisors never really care about what the participants are funded for from an SDA perspective. It's just a funding amount to them at the end of the day. What they're looking at is how they're going to balance their SIL operations, or how they're going to balance, the roster of care. For example, and there's a lot of inconsistencies. I'll give you guys an example. So you might see a participant that's approved for 1 to 3, high physical support funding, meaning they can live with 2 other participants. But if you have a look at their SIL funding, it's 1-to-1. So that means they need one carer for 1 participant, that type of ratio. Now, if they, take on a 3-bedroom house, that's great, but they might need a single occupancy on the house, because how are you going to run a roster of care if you, bring in another participant that has 1 to 3, SIL ratio? So from a SIL provider, they typically want to make sure that their care ratio is balanced before the SDA funding amount. The other thing is SIL providers really probably prefer the 3+ OA houses. This is the recent sort of trend. So the 4-bedroom houses with 3 participant rooms, because most of the new plans are sort of given out at that 1 to 3 ratio. So think of economies of scale for the SIL providers. It's much more financially feasible if they've got 3 participants in one house compared to 2. It makes a lot more sense. It's less financially risky. So yeah, I think that's the answer to that question.
Look, Kevin, isn't that more of an NDIS priority to save costs? Hang on, let me rephrase the question. It's both in the best interest of the NDIS system and the SIL providers who actually operate on site in the house, because they make more money caring for more participants in a house. That's number one. And secondly, from the NDIS perspective, they save money by having more participants being cared for by the one carer on site. Then the 2 winners, right?
Exactly. So obviously it starts off as a cut cost from the government. Like we really haven't seen many 1 to 2 funded plans. Most of it's 1 to 3, and obviously 1 to 3 is a lot lower the funding from both a SIL perspective and a SDA perspective. But that seems like it's the common trend, and obviously the SIL providers have to adapt to that. It's not feasible sometimes for them to put a 1 to 3 funded participant in a 2-bedroom house with a carer's room, because if they can't fill the second vacancy, or even if they fill the second vacancy, they might not be making a lot of money, or they might not be able to cover their costs. So they need the economies of scale. It just seems like most SIL providers are requesting for the 3+ OA houses. Yeah. Those are getting filled much faster than the 2+ OA houses yet.
So this question being, what do SILs look for? My mind went off on a different tangent when I asked that question. How about what do OTs look for in an SDA house? Can I ask that question there?
Yeah, definitely. I think the OTs, they make, assessments based on participant behaviors and risks within the house. So any sort of, the OT might come into the house, for example, and, ask for certain modifications to go in certain places in the house. They might identify which room is best fit for the house. So for example, if I'm a robust client, I have a lot of, I get triggered by any sort of loud noises. The OT is going to say, look, we have to place the participant at the end or the room at the back. In terms of, are we talking fixtures, Minh? Like in terms of what they look for in terms of good build, good design, or is that your question?
Yeah, everything, because I assume the line of sight in a robust house to keep safety from the carer is important. Very important. The layer of the house, the position of the home in the neighborhood. Is it next to side by side near other houses where there's lots of noises and main road? So what do they look for? What do the OTs or the supervisors look for from a position or a layout or a fixtures and fittings kind of thing of their home? So you need to however you want with this question. It's just what they look for. OTs and supervisors and carers there.
I think, especially for the robust category, the OTs are a lot more involved, and they typically come out on the first inspection. They will look at, as you said, where, the house is positioned. For example, we had a house opposite to a school, right? And that robust house just, we brought many groups over. It just never, they didn't want to step inside the house because of the noise that was going to come through. From a risk perspective, like an OT might say, look, because some of these some participants, they might go through an episode where they need to be sort of locked in a safe environment for 1 or 2 hours. I shouldn't say the word locked, but the carers need to be locked away from a safety perspective. And they might determine, how the carers are going to escape in case of an emergency, where they're going to, where there'll be a divide between the carers and the participants from a risk perspective. So for robust, I think the layouts are really important. It's really sort of, it's really important to have the carer's room and, for example, where the participant rooms are living, there needs to be some sort of distance, typically speaking. In high physical support properties, I think there's less of a concern from OTs. They are there to typically see what modifications may be required. From a design perspective, I mean, some houses are better than others. There's not really any defining factors there, but we've seen OTs reject participants to go in robust houses, quite frequently in terms of high physical support. Very rarely do the OTs reject. They pretty much just give a thumbs up, or it's just part of the process, really.
Yep, gotcha. Next question is, do I have to furnish the property? Do investors ask that question a lot?
Yeah, investors always ask this question, and there's no real answer. So the NDIA it's not mandatory to furnish the property. Typically speaking, it's up to the participants. It's their responsibility to bring in the furnishing of the property. A lot of investors think it's a good thing to furnish a property as a marketing tool to attract more participants. While we haven't really seen it being a big incentive, because participants will have certain requirements when they move into the house. They might bring their own furnishing. They might already have that furnishing that they're quite sentimental with. So what we always tell investors is, look, if you want to put furnishing in, you can cover the common areas, but we never require it, because when we bring participants in, we always ask them what furnishing is required. And as long as the investor's happy to pay for that, they might only need, for example, a dining table or a couch. They might not need everything. So it's always best to capture the exact or the anchor tenant needs, and we match it to their needs, and that's a big cost cut for the investors.
But wouldn't you agree that it may be a good idea if you have a budget set aside for furnitures for the house if you let it in about a few months' time, just in case there's a need for it in the future? Yeah.
Yeah, especially in terms of your budgeting, like if your house is vacant for a couple of months, it's always good to set aside a certain budget for furnishing. Typically speaking, most of our houses, we just require the white goods to be furnished, and you can get that done, for less than $5,000. We don't require, sometimes we furnish the full house and the participants don't require all of that. So it's always good to set a budget aside for furnishing needs. Yes.
Awesome. Thanks for that. What about the utilities, gardening, and modifications to the house?
Yeah. So utilities, obviously the landlord has to connect the utilities prior to any move-in, but the responsibility lays on the participants. If there's multiple participants in a house, utilities is often looked after maybe by the supervisor sometimes. It can be looked after by us. Obviously, we just have to, it's very flexible, but it's never the landlord's responsibility to pay the utilities after participants move in. In terms of gardening, same thing. We always tell investors to make sure prior to any transition, the lawns are well kept. but once the participant moves in, they're the ones that will cover it, or whether it be the still provider, it's always a different sort of arrangement. Modifications is a really interesting one. So, some participants require, for example, hoist, just as an example, but in their plan for assistive technology, they might not have the funding for a hoist. So this is where it gets a bit tricky. And we see a lot of participants that require extensive amount of modifications. They can't find the relevant housing because they don't have the funding, and B, they don't have the personal funding as well to cover the costs. So a lot of the times the landlords, will, as a goodwill, will cover the modification requests. And this can range anywhere from, $5,000 up to $10,000 to $20,000 just for modifications on the property. But obviously this is, again, another flaw in the system because their AT budgets are utilized. A lot of the participants, they're renting their beds, they're renting certain equipment, and it's just completely utilized. And it's very hard to get further funding. Yeah. So I think, landlords might want to factor in, or investors might want to factor in that it can be nice to cover the modification costs if there's not a relevant funding in the participant's plan.
Gotcha. Now, I want to ask you some more, what I think more important questions.
Yep.
What are the terms, conditions of the Paramount Disability Homes Management Agreement? Now, I ask this question because I know out there in the marketplace, people offer the 10 by 10 years or the 5 by 5 by 5 years. And that's a management lease agreement between the vendor or the owner and the provider. Then there's separate agreements between tenants and provider/landlord. So what are the T's and C's that you guys have, which are standard? And if you don't mind talking about it, to give us more of an understanding, because I know that some other providers do charge 12.5%, 15%, even 20% sometimes. I heard very rarely. It's quite unusual, but the letting fee or placement fee, enrollment fee, finder's procurement fee, management fee. So what do all these terminologies mean so our listeners or your listeners can understand what the wording is? Sorry, yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's two sets of lease agreements that we deal with. So, in traditional real estate or traditional residential agreements, the landlord signs the agreement with the tenant, right? And you're bound by some sort of residential tenancy agreement. But in the SDA, it's completely different because only a licensed provider can sign lease agreements with participants. So what we do is we take on a head lease with the landlord. That head lease essentially enables us to then go and sign lease agreements with participants. So we're actually acting as sort of the landlord with the participants, if that makes sense. Our lease terms are typically 5+5 with the head lease, and the typical duration that we sign a lease agreement with the participants are for 5 years as well. But obviously that it can differ, whether it be 1 to 2 years, 3 years. It depends on, we give the choice and control to the participants. Typically speaking, it's around 5 years. In terms of fees, I'm not sure how other providers do it, but we take on a percentage of the total income. So Paramount charges a percentage of the SDA income amount, and also that if there's any sort of maximum reasonable rental contribution from the participant. And we distribute funds on a monthly basis. Okay. The way we've structured sort of, our relationship with investors is we never sign the head lease up front because that is a contractually binding agreement. And we only sign that agreement once a participant has expressed the interest to move in. Okay. What we sign up front is known as a marketing agreement. So it's a non-binding agreement, so participants can use our service to market their property, but they're not contractually binded. So if they walk away, there's no penalty, or there's no lease break sort of fee. So to the investors out there, if you sign a head lease up front, you just want to validate whether that provider can actually deliver the results. And you want to make sure that you understand the lease break terms, because we've seen, investors with other providers, they've reached out to us. We have a participant, but they can't break the lease that they have with their existing provider. So they're stuck in that situation. So just make sure that you check your agreement that you have with the provider that you signed up with.
You guys also do a letting fee of 2 weeks. Is that right? Or how does that work? Do you charge a finder's fee, procurement fee for finding the participant as well or not?
Yeah. We charge a letting fee of 2 weeks of rent. So that's deducted off, the income that we get. So just the SDA income proportion. Obviously, there's delays in funding sometimes, so we won't get paid that letting fee. But the first 2 weeks belongs to us.
That's fine, but that's pretty good. So that finder's fee, that inclusive of the letting fee or not?
We do. I've forgotten exactly how much. I probably should know, but it's about $2,000 to $3,000. So 2 weeks of letting and a 2,000 to 3,000. Yeah.
My next question is, how do you assess and match local demand for SDA with your property locations?
It's not, but they're both deducted off rent. So it's about 5,000 typically on average. It obviously differs per sort of participant, but about 5,000 charged once, and it's deducted off from the rental income.
Yes, exactly. That's fine. My next question is, how do you guys at Paramount, what's your process for finding and retaining eligible NDES participants as tenants?
Yeah, good question. I mean, as an SDA provider, and this is sort of another insight that I wanted to give investors, about 90% of our referrals come from our own network with the SEAL providers, with support coordinators, with allied health professionals, and only about 10% of sort of referrals come through from online advertising. So that's the first step. We always get a referral from our network, almost typically from our network, and they might have an SDA. The SEAL will directly, typically it's the SEAL provider, they'll directly tell us what they're looking for, whether that be a 3-bedroom house, 3+ OA house, or 2+ OA house. We have a list of properties that goes out to the SEALs where they can essentially look at the floor plans, look at the pictures of the photos, pictures of the houses, and they come to us. So we've created an external list for our network, so they can come straight to us. Because it's actually very, very hard if the SEAL provider comes to us with requirement and then we push a property. If I've got 2 of the same properties in one area, which one am I supposed to prioritize? I need to make sure it's fair for investors as well that signed up with us. So we always give the choice essentially to providers. They make judgments based on what floor plan they like, what location they like. That's how it works. Does that answer the question?
You say SDA provider service, or is it more of a SEAL provider service? Okay, let me rephrase the question. If there's turnover of attrition of participants from SDA homes, what are the top 3 reasons why they are moving out? Can I ask that question? A very generic question like that, please. Yeah, it does.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to sort of, service that we provide to the tenants. So, there could be a lot of things that go wrong. I'll give you an example. Not all the houses that we manage are built to the best standards. A lot of the houses, have a lot of servicing issues in the first year. And you can imagine for these participants as well, if they've been living in some sort of institutionalized, situation in the past 10, 20, 30 years, they actually it's their first time in SDA. So for them, it's knowing who to contact when something goes wrong and really being able to clearly define that with the participants. So let's just say there's an issue with the hot water, right? We encourage participants to reach out to us directly instead of going through the SEAL provider or instead of going through their support coordinator then to us. So we have, QR codes and houses set up for participants with any sort of maintenance requests, any sort of issues that happen with the house. If they are unhappy with the service from the SEAL provider, they can reach out directly to us. But there's a range of roles and responsibilities that we make it very clear to them from day one. If they have certain issues, this is who they can contact, whether it be the support coordinator, us, or the SEAL providers. I think they just want the clarity, and responsiveness is very big for us. So if we get something that's quite urgent, if we take about a day to respond, obviously the participants aren't going to be happy. So we see a lot of participants move out of SDAs because, they aren't happy with the SDA provider service. apartments, maintenance issues aren't getting fixed, things like that.
My last question here is, and this is more of an industry, a wide issue problem here is, how do you guys handle delays in SDA payments or admin processes from the NDIS?
Yeah. Number one is location. So we've seen participants, they want to be closer to their families. They've obviously moved out further out than where they wanted to be. And now something new's popped up and they want to move. That's probably the number one reason why participants move. The second one is, they're unhappy with the building management or the SDA provider service. So we had a case where apartment complex, about 8 to 9 participants, all of their maintenance requests weren't getting responded to. The SDA provider was directing all of those concerns to the strata manager or the building manager of the property. Their concerns were being listened to and they all wanted to move out. So that's quite common in this space. And probably the third one is the SIL provider services are sort of not up to standard. So, but the whole point of why SDA exists is even if the SIL provider, if they're unhappy with the SIL provider, they can still remain in the house because the separation of accommodation and provider supports means that if I really like the house and I don't like my SIL provider, I can just change my SIL provider and I can remain in the house. But the sort of nuance here is that that's only if you're the only participant in the house. So if you've got 3 participants in the house and there's only one SIL provider, I mean, you probably have to leave, right? If you're unhappy with the SIL provider, if that makes sense. Yeah, this is a tough one. I mean, it depends on why there is a delay in payments. So sometimes at the very sort of get-go, there's a trouble with releasing the funding from their plans, especially if they've never used SCA funding before. Essentially, long story short, participants have to nominate us as the SDA provider. If they've got a plan manager, the plan manager then has to endorse us to essentially release the funding. So typically, if it's not related to the NDIA, it's very easily resolved. If it's related to the NDIA, it simply is just following up and, sending as many emails as possible or calling the support team because there's nothing we can really do about it. The one aspect that we try and do is to make sure that we inform investors from day one that these delays are possible, depending on, it can come from all sort of different directions and being very transparent, being communicative with investors. Typically speaking though, the delays don't exceed sort of 2 to 3 months for SDA. We've never seen it for longer than sort of 3 months. But yeah, it's typically the delays are from when a participant moves into a new SDA house. Those first 2 to 3 months are very shaky.
And you're giving me this answer because of the unique situation of the cocoon liquidation. Is that correct?
Look, we can definitely help. There is a way now that essentially you can unenroll your property, even if it's through Cocoon without their permission. Obviously, how you're going to get permission from them, but you don't need them to systematically unenroll the property. We can help, but most of the houses that we're handed over from Cocoon are in pretty poor locations, and they're all built to robust standards, I believe, with like a hybrid model. It's got high physical support specifications, but it's a robust house. We can help in the sense that we can market the property for you, but realistically speaking, we have limits as well on how much we can take as an SDA provider, or every SDA provider probably has that in place. But you can unenroll without, as Cocoon having to merge down and enroll the properties. So that's a good sort of change in the system. Enrollment is like I have to register the property into the NDIS, right? So, as a provider, if an investor wants to break our head lease, we have to unenroll the property, but it's within our portal, and we're the only ones that have authority to do it, right? But with Cocoon, obviously they went into liquidation, they're out of the business, so they don't have admin to be able to handle all the unenrollment. Now the NDI, all they really require is for a formal letter from the landlord, and they've got to have proved their ownership, and they can unenroll the houses. I don't think the houses are all automatically unenrolled from Cocoon as of now. So yeah, it's a bit of a It's just a process thing.
I think with all the podcast episodes you've done with us, 3 or 4 now, you should be able to send them as links to your new investors who are inquiring to, hey, listen to these 3 or 4 or 5 podcasts. You'll have a better understanding as how we operate as a business for Paramount Disability Homes, and that should give them a bit of guidance on what's involved in the SDA world as an investor. Yeah.
Not really. I think we've covered most of it. We might reconnect later down the path to make another one. But I'll definitely be sending this to some of the investors that come to us, and hopefully people can make use out of this.
I think the last 3 episodes I've done with you, Kevin, is this one here being FAQs. Another one is COC, change of circumstances. Then there's the Box Hill one. Then there's the hotspots in Melbourne. That's number 4. And then introduction to you guys.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. We've done a couple now.
It's about 5 or 6 now. So you should be able to give your investors those 6 episodes as they come in inquiry-wise from now on and say, here you go. Listen to those 4 hours worth of information, and then come back to me after that. You should add these links to this podcast on your website, on your FAQ page or something like that, It'll be easier.
Yeah, it saves me time. So, these are great. And definitely, I think if people can make use out of this will make me very happy.
What should our next podcast topic be in about 2 months' time? What do you think it should be?
Yeah, definitely. We'll create some sort of like pack. Even if when we onboard clients, I might add this link directly, so they can listen to it. But yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited for the next one as well.
Well, what do you think? What do you predict to be the next topic to cover? In your view?
Well, in the world of SDA, you don't know what's going to happen in the next 2 months. So
yeah, particularly the on-site shared supports and how that works in an apartment world. That should be a good topic there. There you go.
Oh, I think apartments. I like to talk about apartments again, just to delve a little bit deeper into it, because obviously we're procuring a lot of apartments right now.
Okay, well, listen, thank you so much for your time and effort today, and we'll talk to you some of that down the track, okay? Some other time.
Okay, great. Thanks, Minh.
Thanks, mate. Bye-bye. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure you are subscribed and following us so you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and to share this podcast with those that could benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.